Welcome back. Today we're talking about the euro, as we mentioned, and why it is that people think the future of the euro might be in serious jeopardy, why people think it's crumbling and no longer represents a credible alternative to the US dollar. So the first thing you have to understand is that you have the so-called rich European countries, the old European countries, France, Germany, countries like that are pretty stable, and then you have the countries on the periphery, Spain, Germany, Portugal, Italy, all of which with very serious financial problems, potential to default on their national debt, their sovereign debt, which, if that happened, would create an unprecedented crisis in the currency and probably force the rich countries to bail them out. So you have the situation in which, unlike the United States, where you have one coherent country, basically, Europe's problems stem from the fact that within the single monetary union, they have very different economies. So what's the issue? What's the solution? What's going to happen? Let's talk about that. So one possibility which has been proposed, it's pretty far out there by this guy, Charles Hugh Smith, a market prognosticator. It's very far out there, but it's sort of useful for thinking about how the situation evolves. He's like, one possibility is that the euro could simply split into two currencies. We could call them Euro 1 or Euro 2. So you'd have a currency for the mercantilist exporting countries that don't have big debt problems. Again, we're talking about Germany here, France to some extent. And then another euro, a Euro 2, that would be for the countries on the periphery that really need, that are debt fueled, that kind of need the bubble economy and they need cheap money right now. So that we're talking about Portugal and Greece and Spain, and this probably isn't going to happen. It's really hard to imagine a future in which we have two euro currencies, or how we would transition to that. But it's kind of useful for thinking about the dilemma when you have two very different economic zones all under one currency. And this gets to a point that George Soros recently made, which he just says the euro experiment has failed. Again, for this same reason. The idea of a single central bank but multiple treasuries. So you have one central bank setting policy, but you have every country responsible for their own debts and raising revenue. So why this is an issue is, for example, Greece would probably want very cheap money right now. If they were still on the drachma, their old currency, they would be slashing rates like crazy, probably going into negative interest rates in order to devalue the drachma, basically create more of them and pay their debts. But that's a Greek-specific solution that would not help Germany or France right now, who really have the power in Europe. So they won't want to take the monetary steps that would help Greece or Spain or any of these other countries. One question is, how does this affect China? Because these days it seems like every story that happens, people ask, what's the China angle? And for China, I think the issue is that a year ago, there was serious talk about China diversifying its foreign exchange reserves away from the US dollar. And they have some $2 trillion US dollars in their vaults. And a year ago, there was a lot of concern about the future of the US dollar, especially when we were in the middle of our financial crisis. And the thinking was like, okay, that China eventually would diversify. And one alternative possibly was going to have been the euro. But now that there's so much this existential problem in Europe, it kind of seems ridiculous to think that China would get away from US dollars and go to euros. So what are other solutions? Well, one solution is simply to deny reality, which seems to be what a lot of European leaders want to do right now. Today there's talk about having its own national debt rating agency. I mean, this is basically like, we don't like what Moody's is saying about Greece or Spain. They're damaging these countries too much by downgrading their sovereign debt. So we're just going to rate the debt ourselves. It's not going to work. And this gets back to a similar theme, which is the new war on hedge funds and this totally mistaken belief that the only problem in Europe is that hedge funds are shorting the euro or shorting Greek debt or buying credit default swaps on Greek debt. There's always this idea, attack speculators, attack the ratings agencies, but in the end, those are just excuses for the problems that the governments are having. And then finally, this is kind of amusing. One solution proposed by someone in Germany is, okay, you can have our money, just sell us some of your beautiful Mediterranean islands. Probably not going to happen, but that would be pretty wild if it did. Thanks for joining us. Hope you learned something, and we'll be back next time.